Without a doubt, the insects that burrow into plant shoots, stems, and trunks are important and significantly damaging pests. All would be considered key pests as they can easily pose major risks of structural damage, death, or disease transmission. Borers are generally beetle larvae or caterpillars, though there are a few sawflies that have larvae that may also bore into plants. Understand that entomologists use the terms of signs and symptoms interchangeably, unlike our plant pathology colleagues. To a plant pathologist, a symptom of a disease is how the plant looks after catching a disease. To them, a sign of a disease is when the disease actually shows itself, often as fungal mycelium or reproductive structures. Insect borer activity is never a good thing. It often means that a plant was under stress or worse, which allowed the borer to get inside of the plant. There are several common borer symptoms. The one most folks experience is sudden plant death, either of a part of a plant or the entire plant. Obviously, there is little that can be done once this occurs. Borer activity can make a plant highly susceptible to breakage in wind or ice storms. Borer activity often shows up before the plant actually dies, but you have to be looking for these other symptoms. Sawdust or dry frass kicked out of a hole indicates that the plant vascular system has been shut down, and this is definitely not a good sign. Healthy plants try to pitch out or gum up anything trying to enter the plant. So pitch flow or sap flow indicates that the plant is trying to fight the invader. Several borers get contaminated with disease agents, and they can transmit these to new plants. The diseases are often lethal to the plants, and as the plant dies, more borers may attack and become vectors of the disease. Damaged cambium of a healthy tree can be repaired when possible. This means that callous tissues form, which will often be seen as surface bumps or swellings on the bark. This is called gouty growth. Notice that sudden death doesn't mean that the entire plant has to die to indicate borer activity. In fact, some borers only attack the tops of trees, like the white pine weevil that attacks white pine and spruce trees. When the tops of conifers are killed, they lose their leader dominance, and this can produce bushy top trees rather than ones with the traditional cone shape. Others, like the argyllus borers, often start at the tops of trees and work their way down over several years before reaching the base of the tree, where the entire tree can be killed. Sawdust-like frass indicates that the plant vascular system in the area has stopped functioning and the plant death has occurred or soon will occur. Many of the caterpillars and beetle larvae that attack plants have to make room for their bodies, so they push out their frass from entrance holes or access holes that are made as they bore. Dry frass accumulations is never a good sign. Borer larvae can damage the structural integrity of plant stems and branches. Even if the larvae don't girdle and quickly kill the branches can easily break out, often in wind or ice storms. I've even seen the tops of large trees break out due to pests like the Asian longhorn beetle feeding activities in the hardwood. Some borers deliberately girdle a branch to weaken it. Pruners and girdlers are usually beetles that do this. The larvae continue to feed in the pruned branch that is no longer being supplied with plant sap. Notice this rhododendron plant. A lady brought this into my office after she had purchased it at a local garden center. She stated that the plant looked perfect, but when she turned a corner in her car, she heard a snap. When she got home, she found the middle branch had broken out and noticed the sawdust-like frass under the bark. There are several diseases that borers transmit from tree to tree. Probably the most famous of these is the Dutch elm disease that was introduced into North America in the 1930s and was first detected in Cleveland, Ohio. This fungal disease is transmitted by bark beetles and was the cause of the loss of American elms that lined hundreds of urban streets. Most recently, another fungus disease has been found killing walnuts and hickories. This has been named the thousand canker disease, and it appears to be transmitted by the walnut twig beetle. Management of both diseases usually entails trying to minimize the bark beetle populations in an attempt to stop disease transmission. Most trees try to pitch out borers that attempt to gain access to the interior of the plant. If you take a knife or drill and make a small hole in a healthy pine or spruce tree, clear pitch will quickly flow out of the wound. This sticky resin is designed to trap and encase anything trying to enter the tree. Likewise, most deciduous trees will also attempt to use their sugary sap to cast out or trap insect invaders. Even if a borer gains access to a tree or shrub, healthy ones will keep trying to gum up that larva. In some cases, trees can be successful, but in other cases, the borers have some tricks that are used to avoid exposure to the sticky liquids. In any case, seeing pitch or sap flows with insect frass included should be a definite sign that a borer is active and should be managed if possible. Borers that are feeding in the cambium area of trees and shrubs sever the vascular bundles. If the tree is very healthy and has good resources, it can often develop new tissues that reconnect the vascular system. These new tissues often appear as random growths and are called callous tissues. The callous tissues are thicker than the surrounding cambium, which raises up the bark. This swelling, usually in a trail or localized patch, is what is termed gouty growth. Gouty growth indicates that a borer has gained entrance into a plant, but the plant is actively trying to heal the damage. Borers are usually beetle or moth larvae, but bark beetle adults and ambrosia beetle adults also burrow into trees and shrubs. The sawflies that burrow into trees, horntails, and wood wasps rarely attack healthy trees. There are 4 beetle types. Roundheaded borers are the larvae of longhorn beetles, and most attack the heartwood or pithy stems of trees and shrubs. Flat-headed borers are the larvae of metallic wood-boring beetles. Most feed in the cambium and are major girdlers of trees and shrubs. Bark and engraver beetles are related to ambrosia beetles, but their biologies are quite different. Bark and engraver beetles feed in the cambium zone and can girdle trees, but ambrosia beetles burrow into the heartwood where they rear a fungus which is food for their larvae. A few weevils have larvae that feed inside trees, and most feed in the cambium zone. The most important boring caterpillars are the clearwing moth larvae. Many feed in the cambium, and they can girdle branches and even entire trees. Carpenter worm larvae often attack old trees, and there are a couple of families of twig, tip, or shoot boring moths. We've already stated that the horntails and wood wasps generally attack dead or dying trees. In order to really understand the impact of insects that bore into trees, let's review the way trees are constructed. I want to thank Joe Boggs, one of our OSU Extension regional educators, for creating the graphics that I will be using in this section. First, remember that trees have bark, which is basically dead tissues on the surface that protect and insulate the rest of the interior tissues. We then have a thin outer layer called the phloem, an actively dividing layer called the cambium, and the inner layer called the xylem. The cambium layer cells divide and add to the phloem and xylem. The phloem layer is extremely important as this is the layer in which sugars are transported from their manufacturing place down to the roots, and in the spring, stored sugars are transported back up to the developing leaves and tissues. The phloem layer is what is tapped by sugar bush managers, the folks that make maple sugar in the spring. The xylem is a much thicker layer and is the place where water and minerals are transported up a tree. In many trees, the active xylem can consist of several years of layers, and in other trees, only the outermost layer of xylem is functioning. When one cuts a log, there is usually light-colored wood on the outside. This is called the softwood, and it is lightly pigmented. The xylem that is no longer functioning is often filled with resins and pigments, and this becomes the heartwood of a tree. This heartwood provides structural rigidity for the tree. A few trees are said to be ring porous. These are species in which only the outer layer of the xylem is active. You may be wondering why this is important. In short, trees that have only one layer of xylem are more easily girdled. Girdling is the severing of the vascular bundles that are located in the phloem, cambium, and xylem at one time. When this happens in a tree, water and nutrients can't get to the upper part of the tree, and sugar movement is also stopped. When this happens, all of the tree above the girdling zone will suddenly collapse and die. Trees that use several layers of xylem can often repair the cambium and phloem and survive damage that a ring porous tree wouldn't be able to do. The emerald ash borer is one of the flat-headed borer species. Eggs are laid in bark fissures, and the first instar larvae burrow through the bark and first feed on the sugar-rich phloem. As the larvae grow, they are thick enough to begin feeding on the phloem as well as the cambium. Eventually, as the larvae reach their last instar, they feed on all three layers, phloem, cambium, and xylem. Since ash trees are ring porous, this burrowing effectively girdles a small area of the tree. If there were only a few larvae in an ash tree, the tree would generally heal the damage and reconnect the vascular bundles of all the layers. However, if there is a massive attack of borers, the combined minds of all the larvae can effectively girdle the entire tree, causing it to suddenly die in one season. For emerald ash borer, sufficient populations and boring activity to sever the vascular systems usually take about 3 years. While bark beetles and ambrosia beetles are in the same beetle subfamily, their behavior is entirely different. Bark beetle adults burrow through the bark and into the phloem, where they make what is called a nuptial chamber. In this nuptial chamber, the female will lay eggs, and then the larvae of those will mine further in the phloem, cambium, and eventually into the xylem. When we have massive attacks of bark beetles, the combined mining of the larvae and the different chambers can eventually girdle the tree. Ambrosia beetle females, however, make a straight burrow through the bark, phloem, cambium, and xylem, often into the interior xylem layers. In this location, where there is lots of water flow, the female beetle will spread a fungus along the burrow walls. This fungus, the ambrosia, grows rapidly, and the female lays eggs. The ambrosia beetle larvae feed on the fungus, not the tree tissues. However, ambrosia beetles often carry bacteria that can stain the xylem tissues or even clog them. Most of the roundheaded borers feed only on dead tree tissues, but some are able to burrow into live trees. These usually go for deep xylem layers, so they do only minor damage to the phloem, cambium, or water-transporting xylem. The Asian longhorn beetle is one of these species that attacks trees in this manner. Of interest is that the longhorn beetles that attack the deep xylem layers of a tree rarely suddenly kill their hosts. The phloem, cambium, and water-conducting xylem are fully functional. However, as you can see in this illustration, repeated attacks structurally weaken the interior of the tree, which makes it susceptible to breakage in wind or ice storms. You may wonder why I haven't discussed the caterpillars that burrow into plants. In essence, most of the clearwing moths are like the flat-headed borers in that the caterpillars usually begin feeding in the phloem and cambium areas, and as they grow larger, they may begin to also feed in the xylem. When they feed on all three layers in a ring porous tree, girdling can occur. Fortunately, few of these caterpillars are able to mass attack trees, so their damage only occasionally causes sudden death. There are several moths in the family Pyralidae that have larvae that burrow into shoots, stems, and trunks of trees. Those that burrow down shoots and stems often kill the shoots rapidly. This appears as sudden wilting and eventually browning of the branch. There are dozens of tortricid moths that have larvae that feed on the buds and expanding shoots of conifers. These are often called tip and shoot moths. Because of the importance of borers, I want to use several modules to thoroughly cover their biology's nature of attack and detection.